New York, a night beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. $1 billion dinner inside a five-star restaurant, where a single handshake could shake the global markets. But the moment powerful CEO Richard Langston mocked the southern accent of a black waitress, he had no idea that within minutes, this invisible woman would expose the deception hidden in his contract, flipping the entire game before the eyes of the world. Tonight, who truly sits at the center of power? And a single sentence spoken in Mandarin will leave the room in absolute silence. That night, Le Montclair shone like a lake of crystal. The high ceiling bore rapturous chandeliers. Every drop of glass was a tiny star, breathing softly over the snow-white tablecloths. The clink of knife on plate sounded here and there, polite, subdued, as if the entire room had agreed to keep the night from being scratched. Naomi Ellis stepped out through the service door, a silver tray balanced as true as a needle in her hands. 30 years old, her uniform was crisp, her shoes so clean that a thin sliver of her face reflected in the toe. She moved past rows of champagne velvet chairs, past the scent of hot butter and ginkgo, to table 7, the table of men who had the habit of speaking low, in the voice of those accustomed to winning. Richard Langston was already there, leaning back, his right hand smoothing an invisible streak on the tabletop, the way someone strokes a watch band to remind himself that time, too, is a possession. On his left sat Eric Vance, his lieutenant, with the alert eyes of a man used to weighing risk before he orders. Across from them was Victor Hahn, compact, composed, carrying the silence of one who needn't prove what everyone already knows. "Drinks first," Langston said without looking at her. Naomi tipped the tray and poured water before wine. The habit of someone who understands that here every rule is a fine thread. Snap one and the whole fabric skews. "Tonight's special is," she began, her southern voice light as a breath of sugar in a cup of tea. Langston chuckled, turning his face up to the lights. "Y'all hear that? Anybody need a translator?" He stretched each syllable, mimicking it the way people contort their faces in a mirror for a moment's fun. A few smiles almost opened, but then they were put out. A crystal glass trembled in the hand of the man at the end of the table. The touch of rim on rim made a thin chirp, like a pin tapping ice. Naomi set the water carafe down. She didn't flush. She didn't retort. She adjusted the space for breath inside her chest. When it happened, she usually counted to 5 in another language, a private secret to stay balanced. Yi, san, si, wu. 5 Chinese words stayed warm in her mouth, though she hadn't let them out. "Maybe," Langston said slowly, "you ought to open a fried chicken joint somewhere downtown instead of pronouncing French wine in here. We're about to talk big business. Don't want dialect messing with our ears." Naomi heard a tiny snort from Eric Vance. No agreement. The sound a man makes when he sees his boss go too far and hasn't yet found the words to pull him back. Victor Hahn looked down at the menu, then lifted his gaze slowly. Light slid over the glass, flowed past the corner of his eye, and left behind a fine, bright thread. "Oolong tea first, if possible," Hahn said, gentle and even. "Then we'll come to the wine." Langston flicked his hand as if shaking off water. "Here in America, we start with whiskey, Mr. Hahn. Tea is for late afternoon." From a corner of the room, the manager, Peterson, observed. His nod was like pinning an invisible tack into the order already in place. Who speaks, who laughs, who stays silent? Naomi saw that tack clearly. She lowered her eyes, angled her head to take the cue, not surrender, just a survival skill where every motion has a price. As she stepped away from the table, she heard the murmurs, the name of a Macallan, a vintage year, a few refrigerator cold numbers like EBTDR, premium, closing. Cold syllables moving through warm air like a block of ice through tea. The kitchen door stood ajar, Steam from a pan of milk clams rose in thin clouds. Naomi slid her tray into the pass, seated its rim square on the wood, all 10 fingers pressing lightly as if setting the prime meridian on a globe. Beneath the quiet, she heard her mother's words. Knowledge is treasure, but courage opens the chest, baby. The words didn't push her forward. They stood beside her, like an empty chair next to the one she occupied. And sometimes, simply knowing that a chair is there is enough to make a person sit up straighter. She returned to the table. As the silver cover lifted, heat fogged the wine glasses for a brief beat. In a low voice, Naomi presented the dish, placing each word as carefully as a knife on a napkin. Pan-seared halibut with saffron butter, dill salad. Langston raised his hand as if stopping a car on the highway. He turned to Han and lowered his voice just enough for the whole table to hear. You see? Even the dish names here come with local flavor. Don't worry, when we get to the terms, we know how to translate everything nicely and clearly. The table shifted, backs, wrists, eyes. If that shift were written as music, it would consist entirely of rests. And in those rests, Naomi caught Eric Vance's look. Alert, bright, a momentary doubt, dropping anchor and then drifting on. Naomi leaned to pour the wine, watching the deep red swirls like isobars on a storm map. At the table, a couple smiled. A coffee spoon tapped a cup rim, making a tiny spark of sound in the air. Those sparks gathered into a single sensation. The night was holding its breath over a small matter. And in places like this, small matters are the map to larger ones. You, Langston called, eyes not on her, but on her shimmering reflection in the bowl of his glass. Try reading this French label, Chateau Margaux, or are you going to turn it into Grasshopper Margaux? He laughed widely, clearing a path for follow-up laughter, but those went out at once like candles in a cold gust. No one likes to be caught on the cruel side when the lights are this bright. Naomi didn't correct him. She didn't need to. In her head, the two words were pronounced right, soft closed, with the light nasal touch of clean hands on French. She merely nodded, as if thanking him for an unnecessary test. Then, as quietly as a hair falling to the table, she let her gaze brush Han's menu, tilting ever so slightly. Nin yao wo yong zhong wen jie xiao jie quan jiu de chandi yu nian fen ma. The sentence passed only through her thoughts, not her lips. But that knowing, that ability, had already marked a coordinate in the room. Somewhere in Langston's leather folio, addenda waited to be turned. Somewhere between brittle laughter and warm light, letters were lining up, waiting for someone to call them by their proper names. Naomi set the bottle down, one hand on the neck, the other under the base, the way one supports a child's head. If you gentlemen need anything else, please call me, she said, so calmly that the sentence felt like a freshly ironed napkin laid neatly on an open palm. She turned away, the tray tilting just enough for chandelier light to pour into a narrow road. The road ran along her arm, over her shoulder, across the nape of her neck, and at its end, a door left slightly ajar. Behind it, something waited. Not impulse, not a strike back, but another language, another position, another order to the chairs around the table. Naomi paused at the service station, eyes through the glass on table 7 under its quiet lights. She saw Han's lips move, saw Eric's gaze tilt away and return, saw Langston's hand touch the bridge of his nose like a man about to start a familiar game. She breathed in, breathed out, counted slow, yi, san. Beneath the numbers lay an unspoken promise to herself. When the time comes, I will call everything by its proper name. Morning in the narrow third-floor apartment. Light slipped through the blinds, falling in long stripes across cracked plaster walls. Naomi Ellis sat up, the alarm still buzzing faintly. The room was so still, she could hear the leaves outside brushing softly against each other. On the wall in front of her hung a master's degree in linguistics, lonely in a scratched wooden frame. The embossed seal, her name, the promise of a road that had been cut short. Next to it, a few old photos. Naomi in a graduation gown, smiling widely, her mother at her side in a simple floral dress, hand gripping her daughter's shoulder. The photo had faded, but her mother's eyes still shone as brightly as ever. The small apartment was crowded with books, Mandarin textbooks, French readers, and Japanese vocabulary drills. A half-finished dissertation draft tucked inside a worn binder. Words that once felt like wings, now stacked together like feathers locked in a chest. Naomi ran her fingers along the spines, dust clinging to her skin, as if even knowledge itself had worn thin after years of double shifts. In the tiny kitchen, the kettle whistled. She poured hot water into a cracked clay teapot. Oolong leaves opened, releasing a fragrance that carried her back to Beijing. The library aisles, the endless pages of comparative linguistics, the certainty that her future would be lecture halls, whiteboards, markers inked with ideas. Her mother's voice called from the other room. Rishkim, faint but clear. "Naomi, you're up." The door creaked open. A woman past 60, frail in her wheelchair, with a hand-woven shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp, wise. Her skin was pale from illness. "I already poured your tea, Mama," Naomi said, carrying the cup. The scent of tea mingled with the smell of medicated oils, half warm, half bitter in the air. Her mother drew a long breath, shaky hands clutching the cup, swollen fingers from her illness, but still holding on as if to a small flame. "Another night shift?" Naomi nodded. "Serving the VIP floor tonight might bring in better tips." She didn't mention the slurs, the stares that looked straight through her as if she were a chair instead of a woman. She didn't say that sometimes billion-dollar deals were whispered over the table while she stood there, treated like part of the decor. Her mother smiled, a thin smile, but warm. "Do you remember what your grandmother used to say? Education is the one thing no one can take away." Naomi whispered, "I remember." "Then keep it, Naomi. One day someone will need you, not to pour wine, but to translate the world." Naomi tightened her hold on the teacup. The heat ran through her fingers. She bent down and kissed her mother's forehead. "I'll remember, Mama." When she left, she slipped into her black uniform, fitted but worn. In her bag beside the order pad, she tucked a thin book. Business Mandarin for negotiations. Its pages are bent and frayed, with corners folded from old receipts. A habit she never dropped, reading between shifts, keeping a small flame alive through the long nights. She pulled her scarf close and stepped into the hallway. The elevator bell rattled, the scent of disinfectant from the hospital nearby drifting in. Naomi breathed deep and stepped inside. The same journey as always, from a cramped apartment where knowledge hung on the walls to a restaurant where she was just a shadow. But inside, she knew. With every step, she was moving closer to a moment when the chest of knowledge would finally be unlocked, not just for her, but for the world to see. ChatGPT đã nói. Late afternoon. Le Montclair slipped into its familiar gown of elegance, white silk draped from the high ceiling, glittering beneath crystal chandeliers. On every table, crystal glasses were arranged like petals, silverware gleaming in straight lines like soldiers on parade. The whole space was built to convince people that here, order was untouchable. Those who sat to dine and those who stood to serve. Naomi entered through the back door. Her uniform was neat and her hair was pulled tightly into a bun. The smell of melting butter and seared meat mingled with the sharp rhythm of knives on cutting boards, a symphony she knew by heart. Jorge, the dishwasher of 20 years, nodded. "Big guests tonight, Naomi." She answered with a faint smile, hiding the tightness in her chest. The click of leather shoes on tile. Peterson, the restaurant manager, appeared. Thin, with eyes always knotted in worry, but his voice was cold, sharp. He scanned his list, then fixed his gaze on Naomi. "Ellis, you're on table 7. International delegation. Extremely important. Don't ruin our evening." Naomi nodded. "Yes, sir." Peterson tilted his head. His eyes caught on her small bag in the staff locker. A book spine peeked out, his brow furrowed. "What's this? You're still bringing books to work?" "Listen, this isn't a library. Here, you smile and stay quiet, got it?" Naomi swallowed hard. She shut the locker, hiding her business Mandarin book. "I understand." His lips pressed tight. "Remember this? Your background music, not the lead singer. If they ask about wine, send Chad. They want someone with polish, someone who has the right tone to talk about Bordeaux. And you, don't let that southern drawl slip too much. People here like refinement." Chad, white, 3 years younger than Naomi, stood nearby, adjusting his tie with a smirk. He looked up, voice loud enough for the room. "Well, I'd say the VIPs might appreciate a voice, a little easier on the ears." A few chuckles from the other staff. Naomi stayed silent and steadied the silver tray in her hands. Sometimes silence is the only shield. Meanwhile, Peterson guided Chad to the wine station, fussing over every detail of how to present Macallan Chateau Margaux, as if Chad were some precious jewel. Naomi stood a few steps away, remembering how just last week she had corrected his clumsy attempt at Gewürztraminer. Peterson had brushed it off. "Don't show off, Ellis. Guests come here to relax, not to be lectured." Naomi bit her lip. In her head, she could recite the wine list in English, French, and even Mandarin, but here knowledge was weight, a mark that drew scrutiny. Break time. The clock struck 5:30. Staff scattered, some smoking, some scrolling their phones. Naomi sat at a small table in the back room and opened her old book, a page marked with a folded receipt. The Chinese characters seemed to dance beneath her eyes. She whispered, 关系建立在信任之上. Relationships are built on trust. Her voice was low, steady but sharp. The door swung open. Peterson again, his leather shoes tapped hard. He spotted the book. His eyebrows shot up. Naomi quickly slipped it between menus and lifted her order pad instead. "Just reviewing tonight's dishes, sir." He stared a moment, then nodded. "Good. Guests are arriving half an hour early. Be ready. And Ellis, smile, nothing more." He turned and left. Naomi exhaled, her breath long and thin. She brushed her hand across the margin of the book, where an old note in pencil remained from her Beijing days. "A jade stone uncut will never shine. A person untested will never grow." She closed the book and tucked it back into her bag. In her chest stirred a quiet certainty. Tonight would not be like the others. At exactly 6:45, the main doors of Le Montclair swung open. A cool breeze slipped in, carrying with it the faint hum of Wall Street outside, as if the city itself wanted to sneak into this gilded room to watch. The first to enter weren't guests, but 2 bodyguards in black suits. Faces hard, steps heavy, their movement beat like a low drum. Their eyes swept across the room, pausing on every corner table, every stone pillar, every velvet curtain. The quiet space stretched tighter, like strings being wound on an instrument. Behind them came 3 assistants, each carrying an iPad and dark leather portfolios. Their steps fell in rhythm, every gesture precise, nothing wasted. And then he appeared. Victor Han, the man the financial world called the master of silence. Han wore a charcoal suit, no tie. His shirt, pure white, collar unbuttoned at the top. On his left wrist, a simple platinum watch. Round face, thin hands, the only thing that caught the chandelier's light. No diamonds, no gold pins. His presence alone drew every eye toward him. His face carried the calm of a scholar, but his eyes were deep, sharp, like a man seeing something far beyond the rest of the room. A few diners not connected to the evening whispered, "Is that him? Victor Han?" then quickly fell silent. The aura around him made others shrink without meaning to. From a distance, Naomi watched. The silver tray in her hands was damp with condensation rising from the glassware. She remembered a magazine article she had read during a stolen break, how Han had turned a small Beijing startup into a $100 billion AI empire in just a decade. They wrote of him as one writes of a river, quiet but impossible to stop. Manager Peterson practically rushed to the door, his normally tight face lit up, his voice rising a pitch. "Mr. Han, what an honor to welcome you to Le Montclair." Han bowed his head slightly. The gesture was so modest that it made Peterson's flattery sound needless. "Thank you." "No," he said, his English accented but precise. Immediately, one of the assistants leaned in and whispered, "The party would like the special oolong tea we requested in advance." Peterson nodded quickly, eyes flashing with panic. He had clearly forgotten. Turning back, he snapped under his breath, almost a bark. "Ellis, down to the cellar. Bring up the special tea set, now." Naomi nodded and hurried. In storage, she found the tea service tucked inside a wooden chest with a thin film of dust across the lid. She touched the carved dragons and phoenixes, felt the weight of fired porcelain in her palms. This was more than serviceware. It was a ritual, a bridge between two cultures. By the time Naomi returned, Han was seated. Table 7 glowed under the chandeliers, the white cloth spread clean as first snow. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes scanning every detail. The placement of glasses, the spacing of knives, even the staff's posture. He said nothing, but Naomi felt it. In his silence, nothing went unrecorded. Then the doors opened again. The air shifted instantly. A gust of noise and swagger spilled in. Richard Langston had arrived. Tall, with silver hair swept back, his skin bronzed like a man fresh from a private beach. An Italian suit hugged his frame, a dark red tie at his chest, and his shoes were polished so bright that they mirrored the chandeliers above. He didn't rush, but every step declared, "I own this place." "Victor, my friend," Langston boomed, voice echoing across the dining room. Heads turned from other tables. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting." Han rose, polite, bowing his head. "We just arrived, Mr. Langston." "Richard, call me Richard." Langston clapped Han on the shoulder, too heavy to be warmth, more like a claim of possession. Peterson hovered nearby, bent low in a bow. Langston barely flicked his eyes at him, as if at a janitor. The contrast was sharp. Han received an embrace, Peterson a cold nod. Naomi approached, setting the tea service carefully on the side table. One cup, one pot, then another, each placed steadily though her hands trembled. She felt Han's eyes on her, and when she looked up, he gave the slightest nod, a silent thank you. But then Langston waved it off. "Oh, come on, we don't need this. Please bring me the finest whiskey you've got. Macallan 25, if it's here." Peterson hesitated, but Mr. Han specifically requested. Langston cut him short, tone tinged with mockery. "Trust me, billion-dollar deals in America are sealed with strong drink, not tea. Isn't that right, Victor?" Han didn't answer right away. Only a faint smile, his face unreadable. But Naomi, standing nearby with the water pitcher, saw it. A flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Thin, brief, but as clear as a crack in glass. She set down the glass carefully, forcing her hand to stay steady. In her head echoed a line she had once read in an interview with Han. "Without trust, there is no deal." Langston turned, gesturing at Naomi, signaling for her to pour. He didn't meet her gaze. He stared instead at her reflection, shimmering in the curve of his glass. "Tonight we'll have halibut with saffron butter and citrus salad. Don't worry, Victor, I'll help you make sense of all these strange names." His smile was taut, too bright to hide the arrogance beneath. Naomi drew a breath and began to present the dish in her clear, measured voice. But Langston cut her off mid-sentence, half joking, half sneer. "You catching this, Victor? With that southern drawl, even I need a translator." A crooked chuckle slipped from a few at the table, then died fast. One of Han's aides trembled, spilling drops of red wine across the white cloth. Naomi held her polite smile, but inside her heart pounded like a hammer on steel. She heard forks pause at nearby tables, felt curious glances slide her way. The invisible line was drawn. Some people had the lights on, their voices filling the room. Others were allowed only the shadows. Even if they knew more, understood deeper, deserved a seat at the table. Naomi stepped back quietly, her hand gripping the neck of the silver tray. Han's face, calm but fractured, burned in her mind. So did Langston's booming laughter, blotting out culture and dignity like ink spilling across white linen. Two worlds had taken their seats at the same table. And Naomi could feel it. Beneath the stillness, the fire was already catching. And she, where the unseen server, was standing right beside the spark. ChatGPT đã nói. The air inside Le Montclair thickened like honey left too long, sticky on the fingertips, yet no one dared to wipe it away. The chandeliers still poured down their warm glow, but the warmth felt false, like lacquer glossing over a cold iron door. At table 7, the men nibbled their appetizers, trying to settle into the noise Richard Langston had dragged into the room. Naomi stood beside them, silver tray balanced neatly, her posture straight and still. She was a shadow trained to be present, yet invisible. Langston sipped his whiskey, squinting as though he were judging the entire world through the golden swirl in his glass. Then, suddenly, he turned toward Naomi. "Girl, say that halibut dish again. I want to hear that sweet little yawl in your southern drawl." Naomi froze for half a beat, then answered calmly, her voice soft but steady. "Pan-seared halibut with saffron beurre blanc, sir." Langston burst out laughing. The sound cracked across the room, carrying to nearby tables, making a few diners turn their heads. He stretched every syllable, mocking her voice with exaggerated twang. "Pan-seared halibut, doesn't that sound like a highway diner ad?" Those around the table forced uneasy chuckles. A few of Han's aides pressed their lips tight, not daring to respond. Peterson, at the bar, turned pale but didn't move. He knew in this balance of power, anyone could be crushed. Naomi kept her face composed and her shoulders straight, but her hand clenched the folded napkin so tight that the crystal glasses on her tray trembled, ringing out a faint chime like a needle tapping glass. Langston wasn't finished. He leaned on his elbow, glanced at Han, half grinning, half sneering. "You see, Victor, I still need a translator. With this kind of accent, even pronouncing a French wine is a challenge. Chateau Margaux, or should we call it Grasshopper Magao?" The words dropped like stones into water, rippling through the room. Forks froze mid-air. Han set his water glass down softly. A small gesture, but Naomi caught it. For a man who rarely revealed emotion, it was the closest thing to a protest. His gaze lingered on her, quiet as though weighing something. In that instant, Naomi's mind leapt back to Beijing. Long hours in lecture halls, heated debates in Mandarin, professors correcting her tone until it was flawless. The essays she had written on the power of language, how it could build bridges or erect walls. And now, in this gilded room, that wall had risen against her, constructed only from her skin and her voice. Eric Vance, Langston's second, cleared his throat, soft but purposeful. He leaned in, whispering, "Richard, that's enough." But Langston only chuckled, lifting his glass. "Enough? We're just having a little fun, Eric. Loosen up before the big deal." Naomi caught Eric's eye for a moment. In them, she saw something different, a flicker of unease, even shame. But he lowered his head quickly, pretending to bury himself in documents. The room filled with the sound of forks and knives again, but the rhythm had changed. uneven, hesitant, like a symphony thrown off by a harsh trumpet blast. Naomi retreated to the service station, slipping behind a thin curtain and breathing hard. Her chest rose fast beneath her white blouse as though it might burst. She told herself, "Stay quiet, keep the job, Mama needs medicine, rent is overdue." But then, from table 7, she caught Langston's lowered voice to Han, quiet enough that the unimportant weren't meant to hear, except Naomi was close. "Between us, Victor," he said, "dealing with these locals is just like that accent over there. Don't expect too much. Keep everything simple, easy to control." Naomi's chest clenched. This insult wasn't just aimed at her, it spread over an entire people. Han's calm remained, but she saw it, the silence of a man taking notes, not letting anything pass. Naomi hid her trembling hands in the folds of a napkin. A storm of whispers crashed inside her. "He's not just mocking you, Naomi. He's mocking language itself, mocking culture. Every year of study, every teacher who shaped you, they're all being turned into a joke." In the kitchen, steam rose thick under fluorescent lights, curling like ghostly clouds. Naomi looked into it and saw herself split in two, the quiet server and the scholar who once defended the power of words. She asked herself, "How long can I stand still?" Without realizing, her hand slipped into her pocket, pulling out the small notebook she kept hidden. On the margin of one page was a line she had once penciled in. "Relationships are built on trust. Without trust, there is no contract." She shut the notebook, drawing a deep breath. Her mother's voice, her professor's words, the years in Beijing, all collided inside her chest. Outside, Langston kept talking, sweeping his arms, spinning visions of mutual gain, but his laughter now reached Naomi's ears like the sound of glass cracking. From deep within, a fire stirred. Not the flash of anger, but a slow-burning flame, smoldering for years, waiting for the right gust of wind. Naomi knew tonight the charade would continue. But here, among crystal glasses and snow-white linens, she had begun to understand. She could not remain the invisible background music forever. The rhythm of Le Montclair returned to its polished facade. The careful clink of silverware, the murmur of nearby tables, the blend of wine and melting butter. But to Naomi, the air was anything but calm. It pressed heavily on her chest, thick as smoke. No one else seemed to notice. She stepped back toward the service station, standing by the curtain that divided the dining room from the kitchen. From there, she was hidden, yet close enough to catch the words drifting from table 7. Langston's voice, lowered, meant only for the man beside him. But the room was quiet, and Naomi had trained herself to catch even the most minor details. "Eric," Langston muttered, his tone low but dripping with arrogance. "Don't worry, they'll never look at the appendix, especially when it's buried in technical clauses. Han may be brilliant with technology, but legal paperwork, they'll overlook it." Naomi froze, her hands clamped hard around the edge of the tray. Eric Vance, his second in command, answered softly, his voice filled with hesitation. "Richard, that territorial clause, if it goes through, we will control the entire European and South American markets. But if it's discovered, our whole company could collapse. The press won't let it go. Stocks will tank. Shareholders will—" "Enough," Langston snapped, his voice like a hammer on steel. "I've played this game too many times. The press, the market, if they want to salvage anything, they'll stay quiet. By then, their core AI product will already be ours. In 6 months, their algorithm will be integrated into our system. After that," he chuckled, the sound thin and cold against the clatter of silverware, "they'll have nothing left to bargain with." A chill ran down Naomi's spine. This wasn't arrogance, it was a scheme, a betrayal, crafted line by line, number by number. She knew what she had just overheard, a plan to steal intellectual property. At the table, one of Han's aides leaned in, whispering something in Mandarin. The official interpreter replied clumsily, stumbling through English as if searching for the right words. Naomi heard the key phrase clearly, Zi Shi Chan Quan, intellectual property. The interpreter, fumbling, translated it as standard property rights, nothing serious. Naomi nearly gasped. She understood immediately. The interpreter lacked the legal vocabulary to recognize the trap hidden in the contract. Han and his team were being deceived right in front of her. She poured water for a nearby table to mask her reaction, though her heart pounded so hard she feared others could hear it. A thought flashed. What can I do? If she spoke up now, Peterson would fire her before she got through a second sentence. No job, no health insurance for her mother, no medicine, no rent, everything would collapse. But if she stayed silent, a global tech company could lose billions. An international partnership would be twisted into a form of fraud, and worse, the truth would be buried beneath forced smiles and expensive whiskey. Her hands trembled as she adjusted a tablecloth. The fire from earlier humiliation now flared, no longer just for herself. It had become a storm demanding to break. She heard her mother's voice, knowledge is treasure, but courage is the key that unlocks it. Naomi's eyes found the light falling across table 7. Langston laughed, his voice booming like a conductor leading a grand orchestra. Han sat silent, face calm but eyes flickering with unease. Naomi knew, with each passing second, the rope around Han's future was tightening. From the kitchen came the clash of pans, the hiss of saffron sauce, the scent of wine cutting through with its sharp edge. Wealth and rot mingled together. Naomi stood between both worlds, one of honest labor, the other of polished deceit. And she realized, if no one else would speak, it had to be her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow. Quietly, she smoothed her white apron and took a deep breath. Tonight, the truth would speak, in a language Langston could never control. ChatGPT đã nói. Naomi stood in the narrow service room, her back pressed against the wooden wall, breath ragged as if she had run a long distance. The dim fluorescent light cast a cold green wash over her face, deepening the shadows under her eyes. From the central kitchen came the sharp rhythm of knives on cutting boards, the hiss of oil spitting in hot pans. Familiar sounds, steady as the restaurant's heartbeat. But inside Naomi, her own heartbeat was in chaos. What had she just overheard? A crooked contract. A plan to strip away technology. A scheme that could wipe out a multi-billion-dollar company an ocean away. And all of it was unfolding right there at table 7, under glittering chandeliers, in the midst of polite laughter and expensive whiskey. Naomi set the silver tray on a steel counter, her hands still trembling. From her small handbag, the corner of business Mandarin for negotiations peeked out, the paper edges frayed. She pulled it free and opened it to the page marked with an old receipt. In the margin, written faintly in pencil, were the words, "Without trust, there is no contract." The line cut through her mind like a thin blade. Inside her head, two voices clashed. One was a cold reality. Stay quiet. You need this job. Your mother needs her medicine. One mistake and it's all gone. The other was memory. Her mother's, her grandmother's, her professors in Beijing. Language is not just for speaking. It's for protecting the truth. You cannot let others turn it into a weapon of deceit. Naomi closed her eyes. She saw her mother at home, the small apartment, the wheelchair, fragile hands trembling around a teacup. Prescriptions worth thousands of dollars, covered only because the restaurant job came with insurance. If she lost this job, everything would collapse. She opened her eyes and stared into the small mirror on the wall. The reflection showed a black woman in a white apron, eyes shadowed from late nights, hair tied in a neat bun. But behind that uniform, she glimpsed another image, a linguist at the whiteboard, lecturing in 3 languages, her eyes bright with ideas. The 2 women overlapped, and Naomi knew if she kept silent, the scholar Naomi would die forever. Only the server Naomi would remain. From the kitchen, steam rose in thick clouds, obscuring the fluorescent light. Naomi stared into it and recognized herself, restless, suffocating, but waiting for one gust of wind to clear the air and reveal the truth. Peterson's voice barked from the dining hall, scolding another worker. Naomi thought if she dared to speak, he would storm over, cut her off, scream, maybe fire her on the spot. But could she really live the rest of her life silent, watching men like Langston twist language into chains to strangle others? Her hand pressed against the worn book. The Chinese characters glowed faintly under the pale light. Xin Ren, trust. She drew in a long breath. The fear was still there, heavy as a stone on her chest. But in its cracks, a fire had begun to burn. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was about justice. This was about Tao's truth. She closed the book and slid it back into her bag. Her eyes met the mirror again. The woman staring back was no longer trembling, lips pressed firm. Spine straight, eyes steady. Naomi understood if she stepped out and spoke, her life would never be the same. She might lose her job, her mother might suffer more, but she also knew things could change. Not just for her, but for everyone at Table 7, for a contract worth billions, for all those dismissed because of an accent or the color of their skin. A call rang out. Ellis, bring the Bordeaux to Table 7. Naomi lifted the tray of wine. Her hand was steady now. Her heart still pounded, but no longer in panic. Her footsteps tapped against the floor like a quiet drumbeat, reminding her of one truth. Tonight, she would not stay silent. Naomi stepped out from the service hallway, the tray of Bordeaux steady in her hands. The chandelier light splintered across the glass, breaking into shards of deep red that spread over the white linen like delicate stains of blood. The dining room of Le Montclair felt less like a restaurant now and more like a stage. The overture already played, waiting for someone to speak. She strolled toward Table 7, where Victor Hahn sat listening to Langston's endless stream of words. The contract lay open on the table, appendices sticking out of the leather folder, lines of tiny print disguised as harmless, but hiding snares beneath their blank paper. Naomi set the Bordeaux onto the silver stand. Her hands were no longer trembling. She twisted the cork free with practiced care. The soft pop echoed in the hush. The wine flowed like silk under the light, deep red ribbons filling the glasses. She poured for Han first, as the rules dictated, then for the others in turn. Her heart pounded. Each drop was a countdown, and when the final glass was full, Naomi knew she had only one chance. She drew in a deep breath, set the bottle down, and this time, she did not step back. She stood firm at Victor Hahn's side. The men at the table lifted their heads, startled by a server's hesitation. "Excuse me, Mr. Han," Naomi began, not in English, but in flawless Beijing Mandarin. 我想提醒您，合同的附录里有一些条款，和您讨论的内容不完全一致。I want to remind you that in the contract appendix, there are clauses not entirely consistent with what you have discussed. The room froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Even the low murmur from other tables seemed to fall silent. Under the bright chandelier, all of Table 7 sat in a stunned stillness. Han looked up sharply, eyes flicking from Naomi to the contract. Surprise flashed, then hardened into focus. Langston's smile stiffened, his lips parting but no words coming out. Naomi continued, her voice steady, every word like a blade slicing through thin silk. 条款写明，意识创新将不能在欧洲和南美市场独立运作，除非得到 Langston 集团的批准。 The clause states that Han Innovations cannot operate independently in the European and South American markets without Langston Group's approval. A ripple of alarm spread among Han's Chinese aides. They bent over the appendix, scanning frantically. The official interpreter fumbled, pages shuffling, his English halting, clearly lost. Naomi didn't pause. She pressed on, calmer now but firm. 而且只是产权条款不仅适用于联合开发的新技术，还包括贵公司现有的核心算法。Moreover, the intellectual property clause applies not only to jointly developed technology, but also to your company's existing core algorithms. A silver spoon slipped from someone's hand, clinking against porcelain. One of Han's aides stared at the text, color draining from his face. Victor, Han turned fully to Naomi and answered in Mandarin, slow and deliberate. 你的中文很准确，请继续. Your Chinese is precise, please continue. The table stilled. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. Langston lurched half out of his chair, his face flushed crimson. What the hell is she saying? Who told you you could speak? Peterson. The manager rushed over, bowing so low his voice nearly cracked. Mr. Langston, I'm so sorry. I'll remove her right away. But Han raised his hand, stopping him. His voice was firm, this time in English, so all could hear. She is saying that your contract contains clauses highly unfavorable to us. The dining room seemed to deflate, as though a string had been cut from a violin. Naomi stood tall, eyes unflinching. She knew she had crossed the line of safety, and yet the fear was gone. Each word of Mandarin felt like a door opening. Han leaned slightly toward her, continuing in Chinese. 你在哪里学习的? Where did you study? 北京师范大学。3年前完成硕士。Beijing Normal University. I finished my master's 3 years ago. Han nodded, a flicker of respect in his gaze. Then he turned to Langston, voice heavy. Mr. Langston, I prefer to continue with Ms. Ellis present. She will translate for us. Langston choked on words, his face drained pale. His hand slammed the table, but the control had already slipped from him. Eric Vance, silent until now, cleared his throat and spoke low. Richard, maybe it's better to let them hear more clearly. If not, the legal risk, the press. Langston's glare cut him off, but no rebuttal came. Han shifted his gaze to Peterson. I will pay her consulting fee, $50,000. Tonight, she will stay. Peterson froze. 50,000 in a single evening. His head bobbed furiously. Yes, of course, Mr. Han. Naomi untied her white apron, folded it neatly, and set it on Peterson's arm. Then she pulled out the empty chair between Han and his CFO. She sat, spine straight, eyes alight. The entire room seemed to stop. A black woman who had been a shadow moments ago was now seated at the heart of an international negotiation. Langston gripped his whiskey glass, teeth grinding, but he could no longer stop it. Naomi inhaled, then began to translate. Every clause, every question, every line of fine print. Her voice was no longer background music. It was the bridge spanning two worlds. And in that moment, Le Montclair ceased to be a five-star restaurant. The air at table 7 had grown so dense that it felt as if it could be cut with a knife. The Bordeaux shimmered under the chandelier's glow, but no one cared for the taste anymore. Every eye was fixed on Naomi Ellis, the woman who had been a shadow behind chairs only moments before, now seated upright between two leaders, an unexpected bridge. Victor Han flipped to the appendix and slid it toward Naomi. He gestured. Please, translate this section exactly. Naomi nodded, reading in Mandarin. 本条款定义所有衍生技术为联合拥有，包括任何与 Langston 集团系统相结合的现有算法。This clause defines all derivative technology as jointly owned, including any existing algorithms once integrated with Langston Group systems. Han's brow furrowed. His CFO whispered, that would mean we lose all rights to our AI core. Naomi translated into English, her tone calm yet cutting. Your definition of derivative technology essentially swallows their core algorithm. That is not standard. The silence deepened. The clink of silverware from other tables sounded far away, like metal echoing in an empty warehouse. Langston forced a smile, though the corner of his mouth twitched. Standard industry language. Nothing unusual, my legal team assured me. Eric Vance, his deputy, cleared his throat, hesitation flashing across his eyes. He looked at Langston. Richard, this definition is far too broad. If we sign it, litigation risk is enormous. We could be accused of clause abuse. Langston snapped his head around, voice tight as a vice. Eric, don't make this messy. This is how we win. Naomi translated Han's words with precision, leaving nothing behind. Han tapped his pen lightly on the table. In China, business without trust is not business. If this clause remains, there will be no deal. The statement was simple, yet it struck like a hammer against the table. Peterson, the restaurant manager, stood a few feet away, sweat pouring down his temples. He clutched Naomi's folded apron in his hands, paralyzed. Never in his life had he seen one evening capable of overturning so many destinies. Naomi turned page after page, pointing out other clauses buried in circular language meant to obscure risk. She explained them in Mandarin, then in English, with sharp and fluid precision. Her voice was not loud, but every word pierced the polished surface like a needle. Han nodded, growing more convinced with each sentence. His aides began directing questions straight to Naomi rather than the official interpreter. That interpreter hung his head, sweat dripping, knowing his position had collapsed. Eric Vance sat frozen, staring at the contract. Finally, he whispered low enough for Langston to hear. Richard, if the press discovers we hid this, the stock could lose tens of billions. Everything you built could vanish. Langston narrowed his eyes, hissing back. Don't be weak, they'll never know. Tonight we sign, tomorrow the headlines call it a historic partnership. Who cares about appendices? Naomi heard every word. Her heart pounded, but she translated faithfully for Han, not omitting a single syllable. And as Langston's English twisted into Mandarin through Naomi's voice, Han's face turned cold, while his team buzzed like a hive struck open. Han set his pen down and tapped it 3 times. Enough! He looked directly at Langston. Mr. Langston, we came here for partnership, not deception. If you keep this language, there will be no signature tomorrow. And worse for you, the world will know. Langston's face drained. He leaned back in his chair, clutching his whiskey glass so tight his knuckles turned white. The tension was so sharp that even a cough from a nearby table sounded like a drum. Naomi sat still, her eyes on the contract. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Knowledge is treasure, but courage unlocks the chest. She knew she had just opened that chest, right here, in the presence of power. Eric Vance exhaled, turning toward Han. Mr. Han, I apologize for this inconvenience. Personally, I admit the clause is unfair. I will recommend it be amended. Langston whipped his head toward Eric, voice a growl. What did you just do? Whose side are you on? Eric said nothing. His gaze stayed locked on Han, and Naomi realized a crack had just formed within Langston's own camp. Han gave a slight nod, his eyes pausing on Naomi as if to say, truth carries its own weight. Outside, New York blazed beyond the tall windows, car horns. Wind is cutting down the avenues, a reminder that what unfolded here would not stay contained within these gilded walls. A contract could shift markets. A single voice could destroy or save billions. Langston leaned forward, forcing a smile through clenched teeth. Victor, business is business. Everyone seeks an advantage. Surely in China you understand this. Han straightened, his eyes fierce. Careful, Mr. Langston. Cultural stereotypes rarely build bridges. They only burn them. Naomi translated verbatim, her tone calm but steady. And when the final words landed, Table 7 sank into a silence heavier than any before. No more laughter, no more masks. Only the naked truth lies across the table, spelled out on the pages. Eric Vance placed his pen down, speaking flatly. "If this isn't revised, I won't sign off, and I doubt the board will either." Langston stiffened. For the first time that night, he was no longer the one in control. Naomi remained where she was, saying nothing more. She didn't need to. Her role had already transcended that of a translator. She had become the mirror, reflecting the truth no one could escape. Dinner at Le Montclair ended unlike any Peterson had seen in his 20 years as manager. There was no clinking of glasses, no noisy handshakes sealing a quick deal. Instead, there was a heavy silence, one in which everyone present knew the order of things had just shifted. Naomi sat with her back straight as a drawn bow. Before her, the contract lay open, its deceitful clauses exposed beneath the chandelier's glare. Victor Hahn's eyes no longer held doubt. He looked at her the way one looks at a rare gem found in a pile of stones. Langston slumped back in his chair, the forced smile stuck to his lips. His trademark confidence was gone. His hand gripped his whiskey glass so tightly that his fingertips blanched. Beside him, Eric Vance quietly gathered his pen and documents like a man who had chosen his side. Han's voice cut through the silence, firm and commanding. "Tomorrow at 9 we will meet again, but with new documents, clean documents. If not, there will be no partnership." Naomi translated clearly. Each word landed like a period slamming shut on the script Langston had tried to stage. Peterson exhaled, relieved, like a man who had just avoided an explosion in his restaurant. He retreated into the shadows, hiding the sweat that soaked his collar. Langston forced a nod, trying to sound composed. "Of course, transparency is key. We'll make adjustments." But Naomi could see it in his eyes. Defeat was never something Richard Langston accepted. The next morning, Naomi stood before the small mirror in her cramped apartment. For the first time in years, she wasn't in the black and white uniform of the restaurant. Instead, she wore a simple navy suit, its seams hugging her body neatly, paired with low-heeled beige shoes. The master's degree on the wall reflected at her in the glass, as if witnessing the moment it reclaimed its meaning. Her mother, sitting in her wheelchair, gently clasped her daughter's hand. "Last night, I prayed for you. Whatever happens, I know you did the right thing." Naomi bent down and kissed her mother's frail forehead. "Today, you'll be even prouder." She walked out the door with a heart that was trembling yet strong. 40th floor boardroom, a glass-walled room overlooking New York, a long walnut table gleaming, a large screen on the wall, morning light bouncing off the Hudson River. The air here was unlike the restaurant, cold, dry, but power pulsed through it like the smell of new steel. Victor Hahn and his team were already seated, files in order. Naomi entered with Peterson, who still looked uneasy seeing a former waitress now walk beside a billionaire. Every head turned toward her. Han rose, extending his hand. "Ms. Ellis, thank you for coming. Your expertise is indispensable." Naomi shook it, her eyes steady. "It's an honor, sir." Langston entered last, grey suit, red tie, but the swagger of the previous night was gone. He nodded politely and sat quickly, sliding a fresh set of documents onto the table. "Here are the revised terms," he said, his tone carefully neutral, clean, no tricks. Naomi translated for Han and reviewed each line of the text. The deceit was gone, no hidden appendices, no predatory definition of derivative technology. Han's CFO nodded. "Acceptable." Acceptable. Han signed with a firm stroke, then set his pen down and turned to Naomi. "Ms. Ellis, after what happened last night, I am convinced you are exactly who we need. Han Innovations is opening a North American division. We want to offer you the position of Director of International Communications." Salary, benefits, flexibility. You will build bridges between East and West. Naomi's breath caught. Her heart thudded. She remembered the long hours in the Beijing library, the dream of research and negotiation, and here it was again, not in theory, but in reality. She steadied herself. I would be honored. Across the table, Langston cleared his throat, tugging at his tie. His voice strained. Ms. Ellis, before you accept, Whitman Enterprises also recognizes your unique talent. I owe you an apology. Last night, my words were out of line. I judged you by appearance, not ability. That was unprofessional. He swallowed hard, as though choking down a stone. If you would consider, we have a role for you too. Cultural integration specialist, international salary. We could use someone like you. The room froze. Richard Langston, once arrogant, was now apologizing publicly to a black woman he had dismissed in front of the world. Naomi met his eyes. Apology accepted, but trust is not built in a day. Han nodded, smiling faintly. The choice was clear. That evening, Naomi returned to Le Montclair, but not in her white apron. She wore her suit, walking with quiet confidence. The restaurant glittered as always, but she no longer belonged to its shadows. Peterson gawked. Her former colleagues whispered in awe. Jorge, the dishwasher of 20 years, nearly dropped a stack of plates when he saw her. Naomi, is it true? She nodded, smiling. I came to treat the whole staff. Tonight, we all sit down. When the restaurant closed, the employees gathered around a few tables pushed together. The same tables usually reserved for the wealthy. They ate food prepared by the head chef himself, laughter ringing louder than crystal glasses ever had. Naomi shared only pieces of her new opportunity, leaving out the sensitive details, but enough that everyone's eyes lit with pride. She reminds us, Jorge said, raising his glass, that sometimes talent hides behind an apron, and one day it steps into the light. Crystal glasses clinked. The sound was clear and bright, like small bells in the night. 1 month later, Naomi sat in her new office on the 35th floor, overlooking Manhattan. On her desk was a photo of her mother smiling after a recent checkup, next to a small jade plant Han had gifted her. Her mother now had a private nurse, a new ground-floor apartment with a wheelchair ramp. The weight of medical bills had finally lifted. Naomi glanced at her calendar. That afternoon, she would meet 3 new interns from minority backgrounds, candidates for an international program. Her work was no longer just about translation. It was about opening doors for those who, like her, had once been overlooked. When she left the meeting room, colleagues greeted her with respect. No one avoided her eyes. No one treated her like a shadow. 2 months later, International Leadership Summit. Naomi stood on stage, interpreting seamlessly between Victor Han and American CEOs. The hall was silent, hundreds of leaders listening to her voice carry across languages. She closed the translation with her own line. Talent speaks all languages. Wise leaders listen. The audience erupted in applause. Naomi bowed slightly, her gaze calm, her eyes alight. In the front row, Richard Langston sat in silence, his face unreadable. But his gaze toward Naomi held no trace of contempt, only respect and reluctant acknowledgement. That night, Naomi returned to her new apartment. She opened the window, gazing out at the glittering city. In the glass, she saw herself, not in a restaurant uniform, not as invisible background music, but as a woman who had risen, who had broken prejudice with knowledge. From the next room, her mother called softly, "Naomi, you're home." "Yes, Mama, I'm truly home." Naomi smiled, closing the window, and in a whisper that felt like a final chapter, she said, "Language can be twisted to hide power, but it can also reveal the truth. And truth, no matter how suppressed, will always find its voice."